Welcome, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to this next session, which is going to be Kevin Barrow, Omar Ilyas, and Johannes Krohn. And they're going to be talking about Webex call control APIs and Webex assistant skills. We kind of jammed these two together so that we could get them both covered. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to jump right into it. So take it away, Hannes.
Shorty, yes. So this is kind of a practical session. Kevin, Oma, and I thought that we wanted to give you a practical approach to this content. This is day 2, so you already know that you have to place your questions in Slido. We try to answer your questions as they come in. And there's already a word cloud poll open, so I might ask you to basically give us some feedback on what's the main barrier in your opinion to you or your customers using Webex APIs and or Webex assistant skills. So why do we want to talk about programming and software development and stuff? And one interesting quote that I found related to software development programming is this by Chris Pine, and I have to add author of Learn to Program because this name obviously is not unique. And I like this. He says, programming isn't about what you know, it's about what you can figure out. And especially in these days where we have all this documentation, Google and stuff, it's really about trying to get something done, as you heard in the previous session, trying to get something done and try to figure out how you can actually make this work. What we want you to learn in this session is we want to give you an overview of Webex calling APIs and the Webex assistant skills capabilities. We want you to be able to explain how to use this to basically build custom applications and enhance the use case here. And then I want to specifically explain the call control APIs of Webex calling and give you an example how to build, in my case, a bot using mechanisms that you can also use to build Webex applications to basically initiate calls, control calls, and stuff like that. And then Omar will review basic sample skills and will basically talk to you about how to enable third-party integration using those. All right, with that, let's look at the results of the word cloud poll here. All right, so what I see here is the kicker. The kicker really seems to be no coding background. Yeah, there's not much we can do there. I mean, you have to do the first step, and it goes together with the how to get started learning curve thing. And that's what we're trying to do here in this session. We're trying to give you an easy entry, give you something that's pre-built that you can look at and hopefully get you over this first part of this steep learning curve to actually get stuff done. And the no coding background thing, yes, for everybody, there is a first day where you actually have to start doing stuff, where you have to start looking into things and start coding. I can tell you that it's a lot of fun. I started my career in software development literally decades ago, then went into consulting, sales, whatever, and then went back about 8 years ago to basically start looking into coding again, and it's a lot of fun. Helps the gray matter stay active. And by the way, if you get into coding, there's no way that you have to solve crosswords on Sundays. Coding is way more fun, keeps you way more active on that one. With that, let's go back to the slides. And I want to start by giving you an overview of the Webex APIs, and then Omar will take it to the Webex skills. So what can we do with Webex calling APIs? There's 3 parts to it. One, there's a provisioning portion. So you can provision users. We have read-only access to locations. You can provision call pickups, call queues, hunt groups, auto attendance, call paths, and lots of things. You have access to person settings, batch settings, call forwarding, call intercept. Basically, you can read it yourself. And the beauty here is the cadence really picked up. You're basically adding new endpoints, new functionality on a monthly basis. So you have to regularly check back on developer.cisco.com or the What's New in Webex calling page to basically stay on top of what we are adding here. The next section is the call control APIs, and that's actually what I want to focus on today when I talk about Webex calling APIs. They allow you to basically dial numbers, answer calls, reject calls. So basically third-party call control of calls that are active or that you want to place from your devices. And the third part is about webhook notifications and events related to calling, which covers two types of events. One, voice messages, and the second part is call events. On the provisioning APIs perspective, we have locations, we have people APIs. I already mentioned that. Here are the links to the developer portal where you can actually see those. I don't want to go into too much detail here. The only point that I want to call out is here at the bottom. When you use the people API to list or get people data, then there's a calling data parameter, and you actually want to make sure that you set this to true. Otherwise, the API will not get you any calling specific data and will just give you the people identity information. On the provisioning API perspective, from calling specific provisioning API perspective, we have to differentiate between organization settings and person settings. Organization settings, in short, is everything that you find in Control Hub under calling features, like you see here on the screenshots. So basically, call part groups, call pickups, call queues, and so on. And the person settings, that covers everything that you find when you basically go to a user in Control Hub and then click on calling, and then you see in the screenshot here, that includes voicemail, call forwarding settings, call waiting, caller ID settings. That kind of helps you to identify where you would find the documentation for an endpoint. If you want to basically change something person-specific, the second link is what you want to take a look at. If it's a location-specific one, the first link is for you. And then we have the voice messaging APIs. We can handle voicemail and MWI. The important point here is that is user access only. So you need a user-specific token to access these APIs. There's no admin access so no administration authorization that allows an administrator to read all those messages. For the call controls perspective, we cover a lot of actions. I mentioned them already, like dial, answer, reject, and so on. And there are two management functions as well. You can get details and call history. And this requires a user access token. There's no org level admin option. And finally, the webhook notifications use the already existing webhook API. The resource that's calling specific here is the telephony calls resource, and the events that you would see are created, updated, and deleted. And we will go into more details in the next section. And from here, I think it's almost a part to talk about the
Thank you, Hannes. Thank you, Hannes. So my name is Omar Ilyas, and what we are going to discuss today is Webex Assistant skills. Now, before we jump into Webex Assistant skills, looking at the socio pool, I think so I'm going to emphasize what Hannes have said earlier. I think so learn how to code and doing basic stuff, it just increases our productivity, how we can get things done. So as he said, I think so it's just one hurdle, and if we can get over that hurdle, it just makes life so much easier for everyone. So before we jump into the skills platform, let's highlight the difference what's between Webex Assistant and the skills platform. So for those of us who are new to Webex Assistant, it's a voice-activated natural language processor. What you can do with the Webex Assistant is you can join your meetings. Assistant can help you with share your screen. It comes with a lot of feature out of the box. But what if we want Assistant to do more than what it's already capable of? Let's say you want your Assistant to create something as basic as ordering food or creating knowledge-based platforms or creating custom dashboards where it can interact with different platforms and bring the voice-activated capabilities on your solution. That's where skills come into play. Skills are basically an extension to Webex Assistant. It enhances the capability of Webex Assistant. Now, the way the skill SDK provide us the tools that we can use to create skills. We can create a simple skill that doesn't use any natural language processing, or we can create complex skills where our queries, our responses have a lot of variations. At that time, we can use mind meld skills. Now, the question is how we can invoke the skills or how we can use them. So the way skills can be invoked is always by saying the wake word on Webex Assistant. So a wake word is a word that invokes your voice features. Once the Webex Assistant is invoked, for it you can follow it up by giving the name of the skill. In our case, as you can see, it's called room, and then telling the assistant what exactly to do. Now, if you look at Webex Assistant in general, it has got 3 phases. Anytime you invoke the Webex Assistant, it goes into listening mode. It waits for a set of instructions, and once it receives those instructions, it processes them and respond accordingly. For skills, we do support English, French, Spanish, and German, with Japanese coming in Q3. The skills can work on any of our room devices that support Webex Assistant, such as the desk series, the board series, the room series, and the room. Sorry, I just lost for a second. And the room kit series. Now, with the board series and the desk series is quite interesting. As they are touch devices using skills, you can create web applications that allows you to interact with the skills either via voice or even via touch screen. So before we look into the architecture of the skills and how it works, I'm going to pass it over back to Hannes to show us about calling call control APIs. Hannes, over to you.
Thanks, Omar. Yeah, so after this overview, we want to go a little bit deeper and look at the dirty details. And we start with the dirty details of the Webex calling call control APIs. In the first few slides, I want to talk about some fundamentals. And you probably have seen those slides before, or similar slides. And I admit I copied them from earlier decks just as a refresher and as a reminder about a few concepts that are involved whenever we want to use Webex calling call control APIs. The first concept we need to be aware of is JSON. JSON is the data format that all these API uses when we basically exchange information with these APIs. The data structures, the objects are always passed in JSON format. It's an open standard format. It's more or less human readable. And basically an object here is an unordered set of name value pairs. You see an example here on the right. The next concept we need to be aware of is REST. REST is an abbreviation, acronym for representational state transfer. It's not really a standard, it's more like an architecture. The model here is that the consumer of an API uses the API pretty much in the same way that a web browser would use access resources on a web server. And as a transport for REST, typically we actually also use HTTP or HTTPS. So it's a client-server mechanism here, and every resource, every function, every endpoint is represented by a URI, and then we can use standard HTTP methods like get, put, delete, and whatnot to basically access these methods and start to exchange information. The important point here is that REST is stateless, which means there's no state established, there's no need for cookies, it also, if you hit a different server in a server bank in the cloud, there's no need to basically for cross-server state establishment. The REST methods, typical operations, create, read, update, delete, CRUD, are mapped typically to HTTP methods. So if you want to create something, you could use post. If you want to read something, you basically use a read method. That's how it works. So as an example, if via an API you want to read information via REST API, that is as I mentioned earlier, 100% equivalent to a web browser retrieving information from a web server. The consumer of the API basically executes an HTTP GET on an API endpoint, and then the API server responds with a JSON formatted object, and you can then pass that, and that contains the response of the API call you just executed. Another concept that we need to be aware of is the concept of webhooks. So what if you want to be on top of events, stuff that's happening on the cloud side, in this case in Webex? You could basically go in there and basically use polling, right? Every 2 seconds, just basically call an endpoint and ask whether there's an update, and then you get the no answer. This is obviously not scalable. I mean, if they have too many instances polling and too many events to poll for, this is definitely not the way to do it. So we need something else. And the concept that basically solves this problem is webhook. What you do with the webhook is you call an API endpoint with a request and request that the cloud or the Webex in this case basically sends you updates for certain events, right? And then you get a positive response. And then whenever the event occurs, then Webex basically calls you back with an event. And these events in the calling context could be like turn on NWI, or there's an incoming call, or whatever happened, right? This callback is, from the Webex perspective, a post to a registered URL. That's a URL that you registered basically with the initial call to this webhook endpoint. So that is where it gets interesting. So if Webex has to be able to call you back and access a public URL, this post has to go to a public URL that is reachable from the outside, right? So whenever you want to use a webhook, you need to have a public URL for your callbacks. That's why typically when you run stuff like this from an internal network, you need tools like ngrok or other tools that basically allow you to create temporary URLs, temporary public URLs that then get redirected to an internal resource. And the example that I will share with you later on uses exactly that mechanism. It uses an ngrok instance to request a temporary URL that is then used as the callback for these posts. And then these requests get redirected to a local web server that's running on your machine. All right, but what type of events, how would these events actually look like that we get here when we register call event webhooks and then stuff's happening on the platform? Here's an example. So here's an example of a JSON formatted event that we get back when an event occurs in the cloud. So what we see here is we see a webhook ID, we see a webhook name. That's a name that you created when you basically created this webhook. Then we see the target URL. And in this example, you actually see that this target URL is a temporary URL on ngrok.io. So this was an event that was sent to a public URL on ngrok and then got redirected to a local web server. The resource here, telephony calls, indicates this is an event that's related to an incoming or outgoing call on the platform. Event created, these event types are mapped to different call states. So typically you get a created event when a new call is established. And then you get parameters like the org ID, stuff that's not really important in this context. The app ID is the internal ID of the application that was used to create the webhook. And this allows you to basically associate incoming events with applications if various applications share the same webhook. And the actually interesting part for call events is down here in the data section. The data section actually describes the actual call. That is call specific. The header is pretty much the same for all events that you can receive, all event types. But the data portion here is call specific. So in this case, we see event type received, we see an event type type, we see the call ID, call session ID, personality is an indicator whether it's an incoming call or an outgoing call. You see the state of the call, you see the remote party information, who is calling you in this case, and you see various timestamps here. And when we create an application, then we actually have to handle these events and have to react accordingly. The call control APIs, as mentioned earlier, the documentation is available on developer.webex.com. As you can see, there's a whole list of available APIs. You can dial calls, answer calls, reject calls, and so on. And the documentation here on developer.webex.com allows you to click on one of those endpoints, and then you get a detailed information about what parameters are needed to actually call this endpoint and what's the expected return value. All right. As mentioned in the beginning, we wanted to want to help you to get over this learning curve. And I think what's best here to do this, to achieve this, is to basically give an example, a fully functional example that is properly documented, that allows you to understand concepts and to review the code, use the code, and then obviously change it to whatever your needs are. So for that reason, I created a example, a demo bot. I used a demo bot and not a web application because that limits the amount of challenges you have to cover. If this would be a web application, we would basically have to set up web servers and talk about web technologies, whereas with a bot, the interaction is text only. That's why I chose to implement a bot. It uses an existing Python framework, Webex Teams bot, and this bot covers all the webhook handling of messages. So this guy creates a webhook for message events, and then there's a simple simple way to register commands. And here's an example from my source where you can basically register commands with the bot and then basically register a callback function that's called whenever this command is executed. This demo bot uses a Webex integration to obtain access tokens for users interacting with the bot to be able to basically then call the Webex APIs on behalf of the user. I mentioned earlier that all these call control APIs require a personal access token. So whenever a user interacts with the bot and the bot wants to call any of the call control APIs on the user's behalf, the user has to grant the authorization to the bot, and that's done using an integration. So another concept that we have to cover. And this is done, I will show this later in the demo, by issuing an authentication command. And when the user requests authentication, then the bot kicks off the OAuth authentication flow, obtains access tokens for that user, and then will use it from that on. The redirect URI that I'm using here refers back to a local host URL. So we have a web server running locally for the webhook messages anyway, and we can use the same web server to also act on these, the last step in the OAuth flow, which comes back to localhost 6001. And then we have to basically cache these access tokens somehow, establish a user context, so that if we restart the bot, then the users don't have to re-authenticate. And the demo bot uses two methods. It either caches them in the local file or uses a Redis server, which is the more cloud typical way to cache stuff, cache information. And this is how the local file looks like. As you can see, we basically cache for every user ID. We cache the access tokens that we got with the expiration time. And then whenever that user comes back and chats with the bot, we can pull up these tokens again and reuse them. The demo bot, what it does is it allows you to monitor telephony call events. You can then use commands to dial, answer, or hang up. And to be able to simplify the use of the Webex APIs, I also created a Python SDK that supports all Webex calling provisioning APIs and also the call control APIs. The reason I did this is that this helps to remove the complexity there, and there's more details on the next slide. The demo bot is published on GitHub at this URL, and there's very detailed documentation on Read the Docs that explains in detail which functions are where, how this code works, and it also has links to the source code, so this should make it very easy for you to understand the code. Quick slide on the Webex Calling SDK. So that's the Python SDK for Webex Calling APIs that I recently published. I wanted to have this available prior to the SEVT event. Again, this is published on GitHub. This is a module that is also available on PyPy, so you can simply install it from there. Documentation is available. It takes care of all the ugly stuff. So the JSON serialization and deserialization into Python data types. It takes care of the authentication, the 429 retries. All of that is in there. Take a look, provide feedback. Would really love you to basically try this SDK and start working with it. If you look at the demo code, what you'll see is there's lots of concepts that you can basically learn by reviewing this code. It shows how an OAuth redirect post flow works. It shows you some Flask basics. Flask is the web server that I'm using here. Redis usage, the concepts of integration in spots, how to use this Webex calling SDK module. So a lot of concepts are covered in these examples, which I would basically invite you to try to get into. Lots of opportunities to learn. And with that, I want to quickly show you what this bot does. So in this window, what you'll see is that's basically the Teams web app of a user interacting with the bot. When you basically type commands here, it tells you what you can see, which commands are possible. And the first one that I want to demo is initiating the authentication to get access tokens. What you'll see is that the bot basically tells you that there's no user context for this user. And I click this link here to authenticate. This initiates the redirect post flow. I have to put in my email address and my password, and then click sign in. And then I'm successfully authenticated. And the bot tells me that I now have access tokens valid until April the 12th. And I can issue the auth command again, and then I get, again, the information that there's access tokens available. What I can do then is I can ask the bot to start monitoring call events for this user. And then if you see incoming calls for this guy, the bot actually mirrors these call events to the screen, right? So we see the details here that the first event that we got was a alerting state. Then I answered the call went into connected, and then the call was disconnected when I basically hung up. We can also use a dial command here to initiate a call. And again, as you can see, we get the connected call and the according call events here. So basically, this is what the bot can do. It's simple. It allows you to basically play with these APIs. And I would really like to invite you to look at the source code on GitHub and especially go to the documentation on Read the Docs, which is very complete. And with that, I'll hand it back to Omar to talk about integrations again.
Thank you, Hannes. So before we dive into the high-level architecture of skills, let's try to understand how we can get started with it. For developers to create skills in the first place, they need to have a Webex account. They also need access to the skills portal. So once their skills are being created, they can be registered over there. It will be beneficial to have an access to the Webex Room device because it allows us to do testing once our skills are being created. But at the same time, Cisco do provide a Webex Assistant Web UI emulator. Basically, it's not as feature-rich as the device itself, but it's a great starting point to do your testing once the skills are created. Looking at the scheme of services which we have in the Webex Assistant platform, we have got the Assistant Dialog Service. The Dialog Service basically maps user commands into business logic, such as whenever you want to ask an assistant to call someone, this service can handle all that interaction. We also have an Assistant NLP service. The NLP service is basically the brain behind everything, what your request and what your query does. Such as when you want to call someone, that service knows and it understands that you are trying to call someone versus asking for help. The latest addition in our Webex Assistant architecture is the Assistant Skill Service. Now, if you look at Assistant Skill Service, this is the service that manages all the skills that are being created by third-party individuals, our partners, and our customers. You will also notice we have a third-party skills platform outside of Cisco infrastructure. And the reason being is because this infrastructure is managed by our customers and partners. It's the place where they are running their actual skill code. Now, looking at flow of things, how the skills can be used, whenever a user invokes a Webex assistant and requests to use the skill, the request goes to the dialog service. The dialog service basically analyzes that request and it can understand that that particular request is to invoke a skill. At this stage, the dialog service sends the request in the background to the skill service to make sure that that particular skill is online, is available and ready to use. If it is, that dialog service will transfer the request and the payload to the assistant skill service. At this stage, the skill service is going to encrypt and sign the request and the payload and send it to the third-party skill platform for processing. Once it gets processed by the third-party skills platform, the response comes back via directives to the device. Now over here, we need to understand what directives are. Directives are basically JSON payload. They instruct and tell the device what to do. Now, each directive we have perform a certain set of actions, such as they can reply to the user by displaying message on the screen. They can speak on behalf of an assistant. They can listen and wait for the next set of instructions so they can be executed. They can display web views if you integrate your skills with different platforms or third-party integrations. They can also be used to interact with the macros that have been configured on your device. Let's now start by looking into the Webex Assistant Skills SDK. Now, most of the development tools for Skills SDK have been created in Python, but skills are not limited to Python. They can be created in any language of your preference. The Skills SDK follows the same architecture like REST APIs. They receive requests. Once authenticated and authorized, it will just work fine with any language. One thing to mention over here as well, that the SDK is basically a server-based application that uses fast API, and it has only one endpoint called parse. And the main reason of having that endpoint is to receive the request from the Webex Assistant and process it. Now, how we can install and start with the Webex Skill SDK? It can be done by using pip command and running the pip install Webex Skills the command. Basically, what that command basically does, it installs all the packages metadata libraries that are needed for our skills to run. The SDK also provides us with the tools that we can use to create our skill project. So to create our skill project and to start with our skills, we can use the project init command followed by the name of our project. Now, you will notice whenever we run a project init command, it creates a file structure similar to the one you can see on my screen. It creates your public and private keys. Now, the thing for developers are that if they want to change those keys, they can create their own encryption keys and they can change or modify them as per their requirements. You will also notice we have an environment file created. Now, within this environment file, we have multiple default values. And the reason we use these values is because once we are going to register our skill to the skill service, they can be used. Now, one thing to note over here in this environment file, we have a skills secret, which is a randomly created 22 characters length characters basically, and they can be replaced to anything if you want to create your own secrets. Now, looking into main.py file, the Python file, the skill SDK gives us the API handler decorators. Each API handler decorators can take multiple parameters like the default parameter or the pattern parameter. Now, within your pattern parameters, you can define your regex expressions, you can execute your logic, you can extract the information that you need, put it in a variable, and then send it to your device to display that set of actions via directives in a simple way. And I think so it's also a good practice to have default API handlers. And the reason being is, let's assume that you are running your skills and you are executing a certain task, but it's not giving you the desired output. At this stage, we can use the default handlers and we can give some kind of information to our end users. Now, once we define the logic that how our skills are created, it's a good practice that before they are enabled and configured for our organization, we should test our skills. Now, we need to remember that within SDK, it provides us all the tools that we can use for testing. We can test, we can start testing by first running our skills project by using the run command. Once you run your skill using the run command, you will notice that it can run on your local server on port 8080. Now, if that port is already being utilized by some other application in your environment, you can basically use the uvcon command followed by the name of your project and the port that you want to use. Once you are running your skills, to test your skill, you can use the invoke command. And again, the invoke command is provided to us by the skills SDK, and you can send the post request to your local host server. At this stage, our payload will look similar to the one which you can see over here. It will have the text information. It will have an org ID. What are the supported directives that can be used? What will be our device ID and timestamps? Now, doing this, we have testing our skills locally, but it's not limited to test our skills locally. If you have your devices or you have an assistant UI, you can also test your skills on those two methods as well. Now, and it's always a good practice to test your skills before deployment. Once your skills are tested and you have the desired output, what we can do is at this stage, we can register the skill via the skill service. Now, to register the skill, we can browse to skills.developer portal. We can sign into that page and we can press on creating a skill. Once we create a skill, we can basically define what's the name of our skill we want to call, what kind of language we want to use for our skills, what's the URL where the actual customer skill is hosted. And if you remember, the secret and the public keys were the ones that were created when we used the init command. Once you define all those required variables, those output, you can press save and save your skill. At this stage, you will notice that your skill will be created in the skills portal. Now, at this stage, we are in a position to enable our skill in the control hub. So for all our administrators and all the devices and the users can use those skills. So to go into the control hub flow, I'm going to invite my colleague Kevin to take us through the control hub journey. Kevin, over to you.
And are you there? I know you were there, and then we were.
No, I can take it further.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take it further. So as an org admin, obviously we need to make sure, first step is to make sure that the Webex assistant for devices is enabled. To do so, once we log in into the control hub, we can go on to the devices tab, click on settings, and make sure that this box is checked, because we need to remember one thing, that skills are not going to work if your Webex assistant is disabled. So as a prerequisite, we need to make sure that Webex assistant is enabled. Once we enable the Webex assistant, if we go into our apps section, click on assistant skill, you will notice that the skill that was created in the skills platform will be visible over here. By default, any skill that you create in the skills platform and it comes over into control hub, it will be in disabled state. Now, to enable your skill as an org admin, you can click on that particular skill. You will select the option if you want to enable the skill for all your users, and basically it's going to auto save it, and you are going to receive a success message saying that your skill have been enabled. Now the question can be, can we whitelist some of our devices, or can we block some of our devices not to use skills? Now, to achieve that kind of functionality, that logic have to be deployed in your code right now at this stage, where you can define if you do not want certain devices to use skills. Now, that's how skills are being configured on the skills platform and our control hub. Let's now have a look at the demo and let's see the power of skills and see what we can do with the skills. So in this demo, what we have done, we had a room device, and we have this scenario where you are in your meeting room, you are on a call, and you want to join and change the layout. With this hybrid work, people going back to the office. Yeah.
Yep.
With people
Can you hear me, Omar?
Yes, Kevin, sorry, I can hear you.
Good.
Sorry,
All right.
Kevin, you can take over. Sorry.
Yep. Apologies there. All right. So let me just set the layout here. So we were going to do a live lab here and do a demo, but the demo gods might not be with us here. So what you're going to see here is setting the stage is we're going to do some slide shots for you, right? So let's move to the next one here. And we're going to do something that we have nicknamed Plum, hashtag Bobby here on this one, right? So for Plum, right, that's presets, layouts, and the UI using macros, right? So assuming that you cannot move faster than your voice can move here, right? And you have gone into one of our awesome rooms and you want to change a layout, and you guys will be able to replicate this, right? And the default is grid, and you want to say, hey, I want to move this to the stack or overlay or, people focus, for example, right? So you've got your default that's there, and we're going to do an okay and a wake word, right? And once you see that little icon down in the lower left, what that means is it's in a listening state, right? And when you do that invocation and that okay wake word, and then give it a command, right? We're going to move to the next thing. Go for it. And why would you even want to do this, right? As we covered earlier, right? With skills and assistant and then skills, there's a demarcation point, right? This is going to take it to the next level. And the only limitation here is your, dare I say it, your imagination or your necessity, right? Has this room been cleaned? Or, and I do not want to touch that navigator or that touch 10, right? So when I do the OK wake word and I change that, right, and do the OK wake word and it listens, I can then change that layout. It's because I have an injury. It's because it is too far from me, things like that. Go ahead. Next one. All right. And what's important here also is we have bridged that gap, right? So between the Webex Assistant and the skills that's in the developer portal, right? We bridge that gap. So when the layout state of a device is changed, it's displayed in a secure space, right? So which of these skills, right? And obviously we focused on the layout skills on this one. We've got IoT skills, wayfinding, virtual receptionist, but keep in mind, right? And hopefully with the labs that you'll be able to emulate coming after this, that everything that we have talked about thus far, you'll be able to do in our labs. And the purpose of this, please keep in mind, right? The purpose of this is for you to enhance the skill sets that we have already touched upon. Right? So whatever you can come up with for your customer base or what you'd like to see, this is what furthers the landscape. Right? Right? So key takeaways of everything that we've touched upon despite my network issues, right? So we've got Webex Calling that offers a comprehensive set of APIs, and you should have a lot more familiarity with this. Please do the labs that are afterward, right? And also the control APIs and the Webex skill APIs and the SDK. Hopefully you understand the difference between the two and the customizations. You understand that demarcation. Webex Assistant is wonderful, but when you need to personalize it, that is when skills comes into play. All right, and here's some reference slides. And obviously, you guys are going to have access to all of this. All right, so this is what's new in calling that Hannes covered in detail, and you guys know him, and also in Omar. But the Assistant Skills SDK guide, and there is an awesome lab that you have forthcoming, and also something that Omar has, and myself has also we've done at least we put some good time into developing, and the mind meld also.
Thanks, Kevin. Laura, back to you, basically.
Yeah.
Laura may have wandered off, but thank you all very much for that. And I'm sure you've all answered some questions in Slido, and we'll call it the session. And hopefully see you all again in the next session.
Yeah. Alrighty.
Thank you all very much.